Hello, people. Moin Wave back here again as always, and as usual. Yeah, I'm gonna be doing another book review. It's been a good while since I've done one of these, primarily because I've pretty much done them all, so to speak, or literally up to a considerable extent at least. Anyways, this is going to be on the Book of Oberon. Now, it's going to be a short, I'm literally gonna keep it as short as possible. The Book of Oberon is a old school traditional grimoire magic manuscript and a workbook, similar to all the other old school traditional Renaissance magical workbooks that you'll find out there. And in terms of popularity, I don't really know how popular the Oberon is compared to the others. Obviously, it's not nearly as well known, even amongst or amidst occultists, as including moderately seasoned veterans, in a manner of speaking. Anywho, so yeah, there is not a lot to say. It's just the usual. The book was edited and related, and it was translated from either Latin or a similar language, similar as in a language that was spoken in around medieval times. From what I know about the book, it stems from the 16th century approximately. So it was composed around the 16th century. And it has various spells in it for various purposes, in keeping with the needs of people overall, but particularly flavored or themed within the context of someone that lived during those times. Um, and again, for the rest, it's just typical old school traditional grimoire magic in the sense that rather than actually use one's astral senses, there is a heavy emphasis laid on the things you expect from such a workbook, like fasting, praying, and the likes, stuff like that. Again, typical traditional old school grimoire magic. Um, Now, from a neutral perspective, what this book is about, keeping the aforementioned already in mind, or just plain in mind, is that this book is hold on. Yeah, this book is biased in the sense that it's heavily favored or leaning towards the Catholic Church or just plain Catholicism, or at the very least, mainstream Christian religion. And it has a theme as such. So you can expect to see a bunch of prayers and orations regarding prayers and whatnot. Now, a recurring theme throughout the book is prayers that use personally phrased wording, which is incorrect in execution, so to speak. Now, I have two articles that hit home in this regard or aspect, or in that regard or aspect, which you can find linked in the description below. One is called "Does Praying to God Work?" Now, read that article and specifically go to the section where it says wording, okay, or where wording is discussed. Long story short, I simply discuss in that article whether prayer actually works, and if so, what you need to do other than what is written in the New Testament, and or what people might not be aware of or are oblivious to. In relation to the wording part, some summarized or some simply put, is that you're not supposed to use your own wording. Okay, as in the Bible itself, in the New Testament, it is said something to the extent of do not use many words, or do not use thy own wording, for the sinners or the heathens think that this will make it so that their prayers will be heard. The message in any case is clear. When you pray, Christian wise, you use the prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, etc., instead of using your own wording. For example, oh glorious God, I ask from thee to help me in this and this and that and that. And no, that's called using your own wording, okay? And do not do so, because it's more of it's a pitfall. It's like a trap. That's why it said, don't do this, because people that do this actually think that because they do this, that they'll be heard. So the general consensus is that people think, oh, okay, if I pour my heart and soul out to God, God will hear me and He'll help me. And no, you need to pray the correct way. That's what it, long story short, was about. Any results they bring of a successful nature are due to the belief in oneself. Yeah, any success it brings, it speaks for itself. Any success that where any success with a ritual involving one of the aforementioned customized prayers from a human perspective, customized prayer. So one that is sinful and flawed by nature from a divine perspective. Um, any success you book with such an oration is purely due to miscellaneous factors such as belief in oneself, your own energetic level, your own spiritual power level, you this, da, 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 courage of convictions, your own conviction, and or whether the oration in question has already been used throughout mankind's existence, or any elements in it that might empower it of existing just that elements, think of sigils and whatnot, provided that those elements actually support such an oration to begin with. And then I give another example. Okay. I have another article linked in the description of this video, the occult merit of exorcism. In it, I explain, for example, despite the fact that generally speaking, priests that engage in exorcisms, that their whole logic is flawed, why they're still capable of, in certain situations, exorcising spirits. Well, obviously, malevolent ones or ones that bring about malevolence or negativity, and why adversely sometimes it doesn't work to the point where they get overpowered. Okay, long story short, what I discuss in that article is that it's all about the aforementioned. When these guys go to work, they don't have God by their side. No, God is everything. God is literally everything. God is the one causing that situation. God is the one literally everything, like the good, the bad, everything in between. Everything is God. God is everything, period. That's the definition of omnipotence. I am everything, literally everything, nothing, everything, everything in between. Now, what helps these guys make it so that they can exercise spirits, for example, from people and whatnot, is like I said, conviction in oneself, the fact that they're capable of doing their own thing. They believe in themselves, and that level of self-belief, just like Jesus taught when he was on earth, as dictated by Father, as everything, as dictated by God, is that belief in oneself is what is the driving factor behind everything. Without belief, there is nothing. And that's why these guys are capable of, for example, overpowering certain entities and whatnot. The belief in oneself from a simplistic human perspective, the other implements they use, such as Psalms from the Bible, stuff like that. Obviously, I mean, based on how much the Bible has been used and its potency, its infinite potency, God's words and everything, all of that combined creates quite a potent spiritual cocktail. But sometimes adversely, these guys, how strong they are because of all of the aforementioned is not enough, because they're faced with a spirit or an entity that is stronger, just generally speaking, spiritually stronger. And as a result, these guys get like their own Bible smacking them in the face and stuff like that. And they just flee and then they scream, "Oh, I can't help you, my child." And it just goes on. Yeah, that's where the merit of exorcism comes from. And it also applies here. So that's simply to drive the point home in relation to prayer specifically. Now, I'm briefly going to give you two examples of this thing of, of the Oberon. Now, here you see, I'll give it a second. Yeah, here you see an example. This is a diagram for winning at games. It's at page 133 in PDF format. If you have a PDF thingy of this, a PDF copy of this book. By the way, for people interested in this book, seriously interested, I'm also going to leave it linked in the description so you can download it from there. You can download the entire book from the entire book from there. Now, this is a diagram, simple example. Again, I'm already done with what I was saying earlier in regards to the prayers and the heavy Catholic or mainstream Christian religionist context. This is simply an example, example number one from the Oberon. Now, again, like I said, this is a diagram for winning at games, etc. Long story short, this diagram is essentially supposed to help you to win any game. Think of anything, any gambling related venture or anything where gambling, anything that by definition is a gamble. And yeah, it speaks for itself in general. You simply see several names here. Arax, Arias, Ponzi, Adokrasi, or not names specifically, either names and or concepts. Samari, Amon, I conjure and exercise you that you make me to win at all games. So you're supposed to insert your name. I shall begin or play in what manner and state or order, etc., etc. And for the rest, you see a bunch of figures, pentacle, the Cairo symbol, and it just goes on, you know. You also here see several sigils or just plain symbols with what appear to be devil's horns or demonic horns. Doesn't have to mean that they're necessarily such, and it just goes on. You even see the pound sterling thing here, as in the currency, a pound, Great British Pound, GBP abbreviated, in the top left corner of the diagram. And it just goes on like that. Now, I've briefly assessed this. There wasn't a need to assess it in detail. This this diagram is just an example, okay? When they compiled this was compiled taking several elements, whether it's spirits, whether it is sigils, whether it is existential principle-based symbols such as the pentagram, and it just goes on, okay, and or orations, and they simply put all of it together as a means of, it's like creating an egregore essentially, as a means of but non-spiritual in nature. Rather, it's spiritual, but it's spiritual specifically in a talismanic context. So more like a, let's just compare this to a customized pentacle. And how it works is that obviously the person like tries doing anything that resembles gambling. You want to win at any competition, any game, la 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 la, and you essentially this customized pentacle, if you will, this diagram is supposed to help you. Now, other than the aforementioned, what else would determine success? It is simply the frequency at which this has been used, especially successfully. So if you, for example, wanted to use this diagram, the level of success would depend on a myriad of factors, but excluding factors applicable to you as the operator. So from a neutral perspective, applicable to pretty much everyone more or less in the world out there, it's purely reliant on, again, the aforementioned, how much the frequency to which it has been used. Again, other than setting what I said prior to that aside, okay, all the symbolic elements and whatnot. Yeah, all the symbolic elements that I set aside, etc., etc. You name it, all of that. Give me a second. Yeah. Now, so the frequency with which this has been used, how many people have successfully been able to use this? Again, it's very success also since day one, when this was created or composed, better said, is reliant on what I said aforementionedly. So yeah, honestly, this thing on a scale of 0 to 10, I would say that this thing has a potency level of a 4 or a 5. Again, simply summarized in terms of everything I've said up to this point. So yeah, that is it. Now, example number 2, another thing that's also interesting for people from the Book of Oberon. Yeah, it speaks for itself on page 132. To speak with the spirit in thy bed. In the day of Mercury, go to thy bed alone in some fair chamber and have a wax candle burning by thee, and you must have lignum aloes at your head, and say these words 3 times. These be the words, and it just goes on, holy, 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 our Lord Jesus Christ, etc. When thou wilt work this, you must fast with bread and water and confess yourself to God, and so on and so forth. And said this above 3 times, go to bed, and thou shalt see a bearded man come to thee. Then ask his name, which is Balankus, and demand of him what thou wilt, and he will answer. And I don't know what this circle is about, honestly. There is nowhere, nothing is mentioned in the Oberon as far as I know. Either that or I missed something. Highly unlikely though. And then the editorial footnote saying that this page is in a different handwriting and very neatly and carefully written. Now, this is a typical example, just another example of traditional grimoire magic. Okay, the things that make this work is fasting, absolving from sin, which makes it so that, which naturally, check your phone. Yeah, give me a second. Which just naturally makes it so that that it just naturally makes it so that you become receptive to psychic, so spiritual, so astral influences. So yeah, no, that's why typical old school grimoire magic, traditional grimoire magic, you need to do the aforementioned rather than actually train your astral senses, because back then that knowledge was non-existent, I want to say, yet, or it wasn't prevalent the way it is up to modern day. And that's why it's also mentioned the day of Mercury rather than the day and the hour, because back then the best you could do, presumably, was the day of Mercury. And for the rest speaks for itself. The prayer, etc. See, this is another example of a thingy prayer, of a an incorrect prayer or a prayer done incorrectly. Nevertheless, the fact that it's incorrect is still substituted up to at least a minimal extent, honestly, or just plain minimal extent. Very minimal at that, but still good enough to be used by people in general, depending on the situation and circumstances and conditions. Just relatively speaking, by the frequency of usage and the intent of the operator. And it just goes on. At a base level, like I've already explained in a video called Spells for Layman Explained, your intent also, as the sheer amount of concentrative effort and intent you put into it, as in you really want this thing to work, and you're essentially spiritually stating your intent, that will automatically also go a long way. And it just goes on, and these things determine success. But just doing this from a neutral perspective, like a cookbook-like manner, as is the case with default grimoire magic, will not work now. Even if you were to do all of this, etc., the fasting and whatnot, there is also a good chance that it might not work. You need to keep practicing, and thereby, by doing so, you're conditioning yourself spiritually to actually be receptive to spiritual influences to the point where it will work. Now, without all of this, looking at this from through a modern lens or from a modern perspective, obviously you don't need any of this stuff. You can simply summon the spirit Balancus yourself, and that's it. As long as you're already a good magician in the sense that you have moderately well-developed astral senses, you know your way around the ritual, you know your way around summoning spirits, etc., at least like at a base level, then yeah, you'll be fine. You can summon the spirit by yourself. You know, no need for any of this so-called, this hypothetical puha, this contextual puha. And yeah, just another example. This is a straightforward example in regards to trad grimoire magic. But in any case, that's what the Book of Oberon is like. So there you go. Before I go, let me see if I forgot anything. Again, check all the links in the description of this video. You'll find anything of use there. And that's all. Bye bye.